Hi there. This is my immediate post-episode reaction for House of the Dragon Season 1, Episode 2, The Rogue Prince. It's just a short, same night, immediate reaction, unedited. I see it as more of a trailer for the longer analysis I'm going to do throughout the coming week in my deep dives. But I'm trying to limit this to just the 7 major points that stood out to me in a given episode, because 7 is a good number. Top of the list, number 1. There were some behind-the-scenes problems on this episode, but we knew that going in. That it had to shift directors at the last minute, and it shows, but I wouldn't call it a bad episode. It was still a decent episode. It's just some of the pacing was a little off. And people I know who, from news reporters who get screener copies, they actually put out screeners of the first 6 out of 10 episodes, so people could see after the time skip to the adult versions. And they have remarked, this is probably the weakest episode of Season 1, but having seen through Episode 6, we wouldn't take it out. That it's a setup episode. It's necessary setup, that things set in motion here pay off, and like they said, there really weren't scenes we would take out, even looking back on it. And individually, the dialogue was good, the performances were good, and wow, good dialogue for once on this kind of show. Story-wise, there was nothing that was offensive. It's just the pacing was a little odd sometimes. What happened was there was a scheduling conflict with an exterior shoot where they had to film now or never. And originally Sapochnik was supposed to do this episode, but he was already busy doing something else he couldn't get out of. So at the last minute, they had to swap in Greg Yaitanes, who was directing Episode 3. I said this before. Originally, I thought Episodes 2 and 3 were a paired unit, because he was doing both. Originally, it's actually that Episodes 1 and 2 are seen as a paired unit. Ryan Condal wrote both of them. The writing is the same. It's just Sapochnik was supposed to direct both. At the last minute, Yaitanes had to come in, and don't blame Yaitanes if this gives you a bad opinion of him. He's doing the huge battle episode next week. It's just he had to step up to do this. And we knew this weeks ago. He talked about it in a podcast that he said, I worked off of Sapochnik's finished storyboards, and rather than reinvent the wheel, I tried to stay as close to his vision as possible. And it's not something complicated like a tournament or something. It's, people talking in rooms. There aren't really action scenes. And yeah, I can see how, going off of someone else's completed storyboards could still affect the pacing. I was really impressed last week with Episode 1. There were actual transitions between scenes, match cuts, things planned out, audio transitions where the audio of one scene would bleed over into the next one. That wasn't as present in this one, and I can see why they had to swap directors at the last minute. And in return for Yaitanes swapping in for Episode 2, Sapochnik is doing Episode 7 instead. Just feels a little less polished. The low points that were really evidencing the slow pacing was there were these character building scenes between the trio of Viserys, Rhaenyra, and Alicent. You get a Rhaenyra-Alicent scene, a Rhaenyra-Viserys scene, a Viserys-Alicent scene at different points, that when they're in the Sept, the awkward dinner with Rhaenyra, and then I actually liked the third one with Viserys and Alicent was pretty good. But the episode really slowed down for me when they went to the Grand Sept. It's the Grand Sept, it's not the Great Sept yet, that's built later. That was probably the worst scene of the episode to me, and the acting was good. And we would have complained if they took this out. On paper, it's a great idea that, Rhaenyra should still be devastated that her mother tragically died. That should be in there. And it's not like just all staring at the faces. There's dialogue in it. It's just a slow, quiet, subtle drama scene. I think it went on a little too long, and I kept thinking that whole scene about, that is a lot of candles, even by their standards. And they're walking around in gowns and with the long wigs and stuff. And just in terms of visual continuity, that scene must have been a nightmare. Do you know how hard it is to maintain visual continuity with candles that melt between takes? I don't know how they did that. But that was pretty slow, even though I get what they were trying to do, and it does have an arc to it. That Rhaenyra has an angry dinner with her father, they don't know what to talk about, but by the final scene, when she comes back from Dragonstone, the arc concludes with him going, even though I'm going to remarry and produce sons, I still expect you to be my heir. So it needed a little fine-tuning in the editing, and with the director situation, you can see why. This wasn't filler. This was setting up things. People who've seen screeners of the first 6 episodes said this was a necessary thing for setup. It's also the shortest episode of the season, 52 minutes. This show has longer episodes than Game of Thrones. It's Game of Thrones generally seasons 1 through 6 averaged about 56 minutes an episode. Generally, House of the Dragon season 1 has an average runtime of 62 minutes. 7 out of 10 episodes are over 60 minutes. 2 of them are 58, which is almost 60. This one's like 52. It's pretty short. And I wonder, is it short because there were some scenes they intended to film but didn't because of the last-minute director switch? That's a question. There might be deleted scenes from this that were never filmed. I don't know, and I don't consider it a disaster. This could have been a disaster. They made a decent episode. Individual scenes are enjoyable. It's just, it was both short and, okay, where is this dinner scene going? So I'm not complaining about that. If this is the low point of the season, we'll forget this after next week's battle episode. And it was still good moments in it. It's just, see, episode 1 was a hard act to follow. 0.2 out of 7. I really felt a high point of this episode was Emily Carey as young Allison. That was one of my few complaints about the first episode, was that Allison didn't get enough to do. I understand that when you're the demure, shy girl, that you have less to work with, and it's hard. It's a harder role to play, and she did a good job with it. And, I'm always complaining about that Game of Thrones did the we're showing off the actor faces, and that they abused this, that actors can act with just their faces and expressions without dialogue. That is a real thing. They took it to a ridiculous extreme and abused it, but it's better in this because the camera work isn't just showing off her face, that it's cutting to her body language, or, case in point, the better scene, I feel, near the end of the episode where she's with Viserys, and they have that character tick. It's great they put that in, that she picks at her nails and really hurts her nails and cuticle doing that. That you'll see her having a, fake smile, I'm trying to be nice, fake reaction, and then cut to just her hands under the table and she's tearing at her nails. That works better than just pandering the actors with a tight close-up. No, she's in mid-shot, or they're showing her hands, and subtle things. There is a thing to that. So it doesn't grab you as much. Like, the Grand Sept scene, I think, tried and failed to do that, whereas her dinner scene, with a lunch scene with Viserys, did that effectively. That I saw what they were trying to do, and she had a lot to do. Obviously, it's the episode where it's, hey, I'm going to marry the king and Viserys, and this is so weird. And my father's kind of pressuring me into it. This made up for that Carrie didn't get enough to do last episode, so that was a high point. Third point here, and this was sort of a low for me, was the entire expanded Dragonstone confrontation. This is expanded from the books. He does sulk on Dragonstone, takes an egg to give Mysaria, and Viserys says, just give it back, and then he leaves. In this, they're saying he fortified himself on Dragonstone, and they just let him rot there, and didn't even try to take it back from him, and having a confrontation with the dragons. All this is invention. I wonder if that's my bias. I'll be interested in what TV-only viewers think, because I knew it'll fizzle out. That, on the one hand, if they made a big change, I'd be angry they made a change. And at least here I'm going, it didn't change anything that much. It was the same end result, so what of it? But then, it fizzled into nothing. So I think the problem, again, was the editing. It was filmed great, acted great, and it's weird that Daemon doesn't even come into an episode called The Rogue Prince until like 40 minutes into it, 30 minutes into it. He's in the second half of it. And he was notably lacking from the first half. Combined with this, I didn't think the Mysaria scene with him really clicked, and I don't hate Mysaria. I liked her last episode, the delivery, the dialogue she had. The scene is a very long monologue. It's an info dump about her, which it really feels like this should have been split into 2 or more scenes. That was one of my big takeaways from the episode, is they should have had an intercut this if they had more time, the director situation. Here's Daemon on Dragonstone talking to Mysaria about her going, well, I trust you, I think you'll keep me safe, but I'm worried, what are we doing here? And split this long monologue into 2 smaller scenes to have Daemon in the first half of the episode, that would have worked a lot better. Just that alone would have made a much bigger fix to this. But, editing stuff, and they wanted to keep the shock of his confrontation late, but we know what Daemon looks like. You don't need to keep him hidden until the end of the episode. So I don't think that worked too well. Wasn't bad, it was just kind of there. High point, though, was anything involving the small council, and by extension, the crab feeder. I'm combining these into one thing, because the crab feeder stuff was really short. I think it was just footage from episode 3 they pushed to here. That was the opening shot. That was beautiful. That's how I pictured it in my head, of just, those were pretty good CGI crabs, and you're seeing them swarming men left to die from exposure. It was appropriately creepy. This is the vision of the books. That looked visually great. It was meant to be scary. The crab feeder stuff was great all around at the beginning and the end. But tied to that, the small council stuff, and again, the episode slowed for me 10 episodes in when the Grand Sept scene happened with Rhaenyra and Alicent, but like the first 10 minutes when it's Corlys bursting into the small council and talking about politics, that the outlying trade routes are in dispute and we have to do something, and that my ships are under attack. And like actual politics they're discussing, not just with the Triarchy, but there's more than 3 free cities, there's 9 of them. We only ever saw 3 of them on screen in Game of Thrones, Pentos, Braavos, Volantis. I like that they're bringing that in and not taking out, because like by season 5 or 6 of this, with the Regency stuff, that'll be a thing that, on the one hand, this story is a lot more tied to Westeros. We don't see like the Dothraki or Slaver's Bay again, but we would see more of the free cities in this, because they get involved in trade wars. But I like that, Viserys brings up the story detail that, well, the Triarchy is this triple alliance of Tyrosh, Myr, and Lys in the southwest of the Free Cities, but Pentos is on their northern border, and Volantis is on their eastern border, and they're their enemies. Pentos and Volantis don't like the Triarchy, so they try to ally with Pentos and Volantis, and we've seen, from filming reports that we will have scenes of Daemon and Pentos later in the season, because they like him because he's the enemy of the Triarchy. So, look, multi-sided politics stuff of, okay, our shipping is under attack, but we're trying to make rival alliances with things, actual planning, good acting from Corlys. So, any of the scenes involving the small council and the crab feeder, because that was moving the plot forward, and it was all relevant stuff. That was really good. Point 5, I enjoyed the relatively short scene of Criston Cole trying out for the Kingsguard, because he was building him up, actually gave him dialogue, and it was furthering the story point that, there hasn't been a war in 60 years. And Criston giving detail about, he's not just, hey, I'm this pretty face, but, well, I'm from the Dornish Marches, and it's one of the few places it's a hostile border, so I've been fighting, bandit incursions and stuff. He said the Dornish incursion, I'll make a separate video about this, the last Dornish war was over 50 years ago, the major ones anyway. That, how do you reconcile that, well, there hasn't been a major war in 60 years, but he has combat experience, that the Dornish skirmishes on the border, they're always fighting the Marcher Lords, but I liked that as giving him some background and world building. Well, this is what the Dornish marches are like politically during this time period. There's always some low-level raiding. It was short, but it was nice. I liked the heraldry, good acting. I liked that they had her standing on the thing to look down at them. The camera work was nice. That was a good scene. Harold Westling was nice, even though he didn't have a lot to do, he was nice, and he ranked up to Lord Commander also, that's nice. Point 6, another thing I really liked, the last of these are things I really liked, the Valyria model. It looks a lot better than it did in the first episode because it's more finished, and again, the first 10-15 minutes of this are really good when it's him talking, the small council and then Viserys, that was great, of giving some background detail and world building about Valyria. Not just regurgitating stuff we've always heard, but this was their capital city, and it was sort of like how Dragonstone is built into a volcano, but on a much bigger scale, and, well, at their height, they had over 1,000 dragons. We never heard that number before. That the most we ever knew was that during the Rhoynar Wars with Nymeria, you heard about last episode, at the climax of the war, they sent an army of 300 dragons to wipe them out. But like 600 years passed between the Rhoynish Wars and the Doom, so 600 years of being the only mega superpower on the continent of Essos, yeah, the number of dragons could have tripled since the Rhoynar Wars until the Doom, so that's fine. And little things like, well, they were blood mages. They're introducing... I don't think they ever really mentioned the blood magic that much in Game of Thrones that Valyria did. Here they're introducing it prominently. And he said, well, they met in this building called the Anagrion. I know Anagar is the Valyrian for blood. We'll see a linguist post about this, but I keep hoping they're setting up the Valyria prequel we got leaks about, and that's hinting towards that the Blood Mages were the priestly caste, the Sphinxes. But the Valyria model scene was nice, giving real world building on, well, this is what Valyria was like. Seventh and final point, Corlys Velaryon. That's it. He's the height of the entire episode. Any scene he blesses, the small council scenes, obviously there's overlap with this, that the episode was getting a little slow, and it picked up at the end, but man, was that a really strong ending scene. Just in terms of that everything, it's like things snapped into focus again. I mean, obviously it was filmed separately, in terms of the direction, the pacing, the lighting, and the music score, that this was a really tense scene, and it was giving info and character playing off each other, that, well, we're Valyrians, but we were never Dragon Lords, that there's world building there, and Daemon going like, I get to make fun of my brother, you don't, and saying we're going to go to the Stepstones, this is, and politics, it's furthering the story. That was a standout scene. So these are the 7 points I have of my thoughts on the whole episode, and I'm going to make more detailed analysis as we go through the week. If this was the low point of the season, that's not a problem. I mean, it's like our version of the King's Road episode 2 of Game of Thrones. Corlys was great throughout. Valyria model, some of the other things. I understand there was a disaster behind the scenes. They needed to switch directors at the last minute. I completely understand that was beyond their control, and I think they managed to salvage it pretty well. And everyone who's seen the screener copy said, we wouldn't take these scenes out. All of them set up something that happens later. You need to see the whole thing in context. It's just, I'm really looking forward to the big Stepstones battle that they have promised us next episode. That when in the coming weeks trailer, when you see Caraxes burning things, basically all of that is from episode 3. So please, in the comments, share with me all of your thoughts on the episode, whether you agree, disagree. I'll remove anything offensive, by the way. But other than that, say anything, and I promise I'll try to respond to all of them.